official communication is a written correspondence between the Office of the President of the General Assembly and mothers of Srebrenica from the moment when they first expressed interest in being in New York. By the way, at a very late date. At a date when it was obvious that the boycott failed and that the panels are going to ahead nonetheless. It was only then you're going to have all the dates and correspondence, and I'm going to distribute this to all of you, what we were writing to them and what they were writing to us. But in short, they were invited at the first show of interest. In their correspondence, it said, we would like to speak, but if that is not possible, we would love just to be present. You will see from the correspondence. We wrote to them a courtesy letter saying, of course, you can be here as a guest of the President of the General Assembly. There was no other way in which they could be there because they're not an ECOSOC NGO. But of course, I had absolutely no problem, given the significance in the trauma that Srebrenica brought to Bosnia and to the Balkan relations in general. I felt I didn't think for a second that they ought to have an invitation. By the way, there were also some demands for the victim NGOs of Serbian ethnic group in Bosnia. They also wanted to come here. However, they couldn't get a visa and they couldn't be with us for this. Now, only 2 days before the actual event, Mothers of Srebrenica asked to speak in a very ultimate fashion. You are going to also see this from the correspondence, saying if we are refused the right to speak, we are going to consider it. If we are refused the right to speak, we're going to consider it what exactly? I'm going to say. If you refuse us the right to speak, we are going to consider that you are exercising discriminations towards victims of genocide and other crimes committed in 1999 to 1995. Now, I would like to draw your attention to one fact. The panels were expert panels on international criminal justice. This was not about victims. It was an expert panel on international criminal justice with deep respect and sorrow for their loss. They were not exactly, in my opinion, they're not exactly experts on international criminal justice, and the panels were supposed to be about international criminal justice and expertise in this regard. Now, we, of course, thought when we were structuring this event prior to deciding that it is going to be a legal panel, we were thinking of maybe having a panel related to victims. But the reason why we decided not to have victims is that, number one, the name of the thematic debate is such that it focuses on institutional justice, international criminal justice. And number two, you start inviting victims, there's so many groups of victims. In Yugoslavia alone, you're talking about Croats, Serbs, Albanians, Bosnians. If you give a right to one group of victims, it makes sense to give right to all. But I want to remind you that this was not about the International Tribunal for former Yugoslavia only. It was about all the international criminal tribunals. So you would then have to invite Rwandan victims, or victims from Sierra Leone, or victims from Cambodia. It would make up basically for 2 or 3 panels, only for victims. And we had, in our mind, expert panels. So I explained this very kindly in the correspondence to them, that given the structure of the panels, we cannot invite them to speak, but they will, of course, be very welcome to be present and sit with us in the hall of the General Assembly throughout the day. Unfortunately, there was an incident in which my understanding is that the rules of conduct, how you're supposed to behave in the General Assembly, were breached by somebody trying to put up posters that are, according to the rules, forbidden in the General Assembly. I must admit that I was totally unaware of what was going on in the room. It was happening in the back of the room. I heard later that the security of the United Nations acted according to the terms of engagement, and that they were asked to leave the room. It was told somehow that it was my personal security, that my wolves, this was the actual expression, that my wolves somehow kicked her out. I'm terribly sorry. I wasn't even aware of the fact that they were asked to leave, but they were asked to leave because they have breached the way people must behave in the General Assembly. So with all due respect, again, for their loss and with the great sorrow for what they have gone through and what they must be still going through and what they will be going through until the rest of their lives, there are certain rules that must be respected here in the General Assembly. I haven't written those rules, and I am not in charge of exercising those rules. It is the security of the United Nations. She also made some very strong qualifications and some personal insults, I would say, that I'm somehow the continuer of Slobodan Milosevic. I find it personally very offensive. I have worked very hard at some point in my life, and as a matter of fact, risked my life by being part of the underground resistance movement to the regime of Slobodan Milosevic. This is well known. And I found it very, very personally offensive, but I'm not going to continue addressing those issues anymore. If there are any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to answer. But just to wrap it up, it was an important topic. States were allowed to speak in an equal way, and there were panels. They were supposed to be fully balanced. One side decided to boycott, and then that side, quote unquote, you know what I mean, and then that side, having decided to boycott, started making complaints about the bias. I don't think that's a fair accusation. Please.
Mr. President, just as a follow-up to this, one of the allegations of bias was that the principal speaker was the president of Serbia, who is a known critic of the ICTY. And I wonder if you could address, for example, why the presidents of some of the other countries that were involved in big cases, for instance, from Africa, were not invited so that it would be a more balanced, high-level segment.
Well, thank you for asking this question. Every single country was invited in the same way. There was a single letter sent to each and every member state of the United Nations, all 193. Two of them chose to respond positively by sending their heads of states. One was Bosnia and Herzegovina, the other was Serbia. They spoke in the order, in the alphabetical order. The Bosnian president spoke first, and then the Serbian president. These were the two heads of states. In the General Assembly, there's a rule that you first give the word to those with the most senior position within their governments, within their countries. So we had two heads of states. They were followed by the two ministers that chose to come at the ministerial level. Two countries chose to be there at the ministerial level. One was Rwanda, and the other one was Namibia. So a president of Serbia wasn't the keynote speaker. He was just one of the speakers in the 82 long, actually 49 long list, speaking on behalf of 82 countries, he was one of the speakers who happened to be highest in seniority and second in alphabetical order. There were no keynote speakers. It was just the opening by the President of the General Assembly, myself, and the Secretary General, and then we started into a general debate format discussion in which every country was given the right to speak as much as they chose to speak.
As a follow-up, one of the other criticisms was that General Mackenzie was added at the last minute.
General Mackenzie was indeed added at a late stage, and that followed the last round of cancellations. Unfortunately, we had in mind initially a slightly different composition that would be, as I said, centered on the list that I just read out. But following all those cancellations, we thought that we need to invite somebody else with a high likelihood of not canceling upon presumably pressured to do so, and that was General Mackenzie. By the way, there were some very strong accusations leveled on that day against General Mackenzie. I personally believe that they're unfounded. General Mackenzie has never been convicted of any of the accusations that were leveled at him by various groups and organizations, but he spoke, I believe, well for himself during that particular panel, so I have nothing else to say. But I just want to remind you, the general was the commander, the UN commander on the ground at a time when some of those atrocities that were later on addressed by the Hague Tribunal were processed first, and then I will comment.
How much were you aware ahead of time that this would mushroom into such a controversial event? And secondly, there was reaction here. Obviously, there was also a reaction in Serbia. Can you tell us how you feel these two contrast, since you are Serbian, and some say you might even have some aspiration for future Serbian career? Obviously, you're not going to tell us what your future, or if you are, we'll be pleased to hear what your future plans are, whether you're going to be Secretary General of the UN or President of Serbia. So these questions, first of all, how much were you aware? Secondly,
well, I think that with that, first of all, it was called, this debate was called on sometimes in November. It was announced sometimes in November, and at that time we started working with all the member states, and actually one of the member states that confirmed participation in writing later on decided to boycott. There were two of them. Two countries spoke out publicly. This is my recollection. The two countries spoke out publicly that they are going to boycott. One of them confirmed in writing in a months before. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to say. But I'm not talking about a number of countries. I'm just talking about two of them. The
Canada or the US,
Or Jordan.
Oh, Jordan, right.
only two have spoken loudly that they're going to. Only two, to my recollection. Actually, I read in the papers that there were three. I only heard two. So when it has all become interesting, I'd say, is when all these cancellations started coming. And you are going to see when they're coming. The cancellations started coming in the 2 weeks in March. We're talking about the 2 weeks of March. So basically, less than a month, or about a month, if you will, before the debate was going to go ahead. So that was the moment when it became to me, that it came to me that we might have a difficulty because those things were happening. We kept inviting people, we kept working with the people to make sure that they come. I'm now talking about, if you will, the pro-camp. But by then, by the time when the official cancellations started coming, there was a wall. You would just not be able to get any of the defenders, if you will, to participate. And then I had a choice. Well, I would have thought that there would be more courage to discuss it in open public and put forward one's point of view, even though there may be critics on the other side of the aisle, if you will. But obviously, a lot of people were not prepared to hear any kind of criticism on, if you will, the holy cow of international, one of the holy cows of international relations, that is international justice. I am not going to say my opinion on it because I'm in the position of the President of the General Assembly. I'm just going to repeat what I said already. I don't want to go any deeper into what is my view on those various courts. I was only quoted in public criticizing one of the courts, and I'm not shying away from criticizing this court again. We're talking about the ICTY. We are talking about a court that somehow leveled convictions for Serbs that accumulate to about 1,000 years in prison, plus 5 life sentences, which you can't really count in because they're life, they're not numbered. It also is a court that is winding up its work, having convicted nobody for a single crime committed on the territory of Croatia against Serbs. So the cumulative work of the Hague Tribunal for crimes committed against Serbs in Croatia is 0 days in prison. And that includes the Operation Storm. Operation Storm is an operation within this 1 week of the operation in the territory that was under the protection of the UN. A lot of people forget that this was also one of those territories under the protection of the UN in a similar way to Srebrenica, not identical, but in a similar way. 250,000 people were expelled from their homes. We're talking about a couple of thousand dead during this expulsion. We're talking about processing generals who were convicted in the first instance by the Hague court to big sentences in prison and then fully acquitted by the appeals chamber. Now, the end game, the end result of the work of the Hague Tribunal with respect to the crimes committed against Serbs in Croatia is 0 days in prison. Nobody is doubting that Operation Storm was a crime. Not even the court denies the fact that it was a crime. By the way, it was a crime that is celebrated in one of the member states as a national day. So nobody is denying that this is a crime, that this was a crime. Yet, nobody was found guilty for such a crime. I think that it's a logical question that follows after that. Is there anything to be debated about international justice in an open format so that we can better understand how could that come about? President of the ICTY, Mr. Meron, he was the only person who declined in this list, who actually didn't shy away from saying publicly that he doesn't want to participate. Others were, I would say, with more tact. The president of the ICTR called for a plenary session of all judges on that day. The president of the ICC wrote that due to some pressing commitments that came up at the last moment, he can't join. President Meron was the only one who said openly that he wouldn't come to a debate that is organized by a principal organ of the United Nations. And that's a UN court. I personally believe that it speaks volume about his conscience, but that's my personal opinion. But I don't believe that international courts, especially mandated by the UN, should be in a position to say no to participating in a debate organized by a principal organ of the United Nations. Just like I believe that the USG, when invited to such a discussion, shouldn't be in a position to say I have something much more important, and I wouldn't specify what. And advisors in the SG office, like Mr. Dieng, the advisor for the topic that is very pertinent and relevant to international criminal justice, to say there's no way I can change my 1 month long vacation. But that's my personal opinion on the ICTY. I've said it in the past. I'm not going to shy away from it. But when it comes to the rest of the views related to ICTR, ICC, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, which were, by the way, all debated in those panels, I am going to only say after compiling all the interventions in both state and panel part of the discussion, and after we made them publicly available on the website and in the hard copies.
How did it play in Serbia? Can you tell
Sorry?
us? How did this
I don't know.
event play in Serbia?
I don't know.
You were in the
I mean,
newspapers. You didn't speak
I
the
was on
language.
Monday in China with the president of China. I was on Wednesday here. I was on Friday in Istanbul at a big conference on mediation that had to do with the UN mediation initiative. And on Monday, I had a crazy day with a full day of discussion on the UN G20 relations. It's been a really difficult week. I haven't had a chance to follow media in my country all that closely, but my opinion is that these days, that's not a most important topic in Serbia. There are other more pressing topics in Serbia that relate to regional affairs, that relate to European future of Serbia, and so on, which are much more prominent right now from the superficial view that I've had the chance to take on the Serbian media. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, there is no doubt that you are a brilliant and articulate young politicians who, beside everything, show us that you...
Thank you, and could you stop there? Sorry, I'm joking.
I will not, actually, but because you showed quite a bitterness with this cancellation. Do you think, here again with my question, do you think that those cancellations actually were produced by your action, let's say with tweeting, starting with your tweeting war, somebody would say, and later on with the scandalous performance of the Marš na Drinu, Serbian military song that offended so many people and even found Secretary General surprised with everything? Thank you.
Well, I don't know if my tweeting had any effect. I did tweet about this topic, if I remember well, in November of last year when those acquittals were done by The Hague, when the appeals chamber of The Hague voted 3-2 to acquit the generals who were convicted in the first instance to big terms in prison. And it was after that tweeting that we started working and getting all these confirmations for all these people who would participate, and the confirmation of those one of the two states who ended up boycotting. They confirmed their participation after those tweeting, how do you call it, tweeting wars in November, but those were the...
Somebody would say,
Yeah, well, I mean,
exchange everything with
exchange, right, exactly. That took place in November. Those confirmations came at a much later date. So I don't think that they influenced them.
People have a memory with that they didn't feel good with your tweets and with everything else.
Well, they confirmed participation much afterwards. So they may, if they had difficulty with those tweets in November, I can't really understand why would they then confirm their participation in the later months. They obviously didn't have problems to the extent that they wouldn't want to participate as a result of those tweets. So my answer to you is no, I don't think so. And I must say that you said scandalous and offensive playing of the song. I must admit, Errol, that you just now deeply offended me when you called a song that is next to sacred to an entire nation an offensive and a scandalous song. I've never discussed it in public. I had public announcements. I had them on my website. My point of view. I've never had a chance to say it in public, but I will use this opportunity to say it now. The First World War is one big part of Serbian history, and we feel very emotional about it because 1/3 of our male population died in that war defending the country against the aggression. 1/4 of a total population died. It was a 1/3 of male population. That song, written back in 1918, symbolizes our sacrifice for freedom in a war which we fought on the side of the Allies. That's a big part of our history. That's a big part of our culture. That's a big part of who we feel we are. And we shared it with the international audience. And I personally find it deeply offensive that you are branding those songs which are next to sacred, as I said, to my people in such a way. Please.
Sure, thank you. Just as a follow-up,
Thank you.
What about the...
Have you not offended me? Maybe I would have allowed a follow-up.
But I
Please.
would like even to offer
All right, I
my
think-
explanation to that. Mr. President,
Please, please.
Okay, all right.
In 1993, that song was used for raping women in Bosnia. You cannot put away that part
you,
of
Earl.
this song.
That is
Can
an
you
outrageous
address
claim.
that?
That's an outrageous claim.
Okay,
And outrageous and untrue.